The alarm blared through the narrow halls of Echo Bay Correctional Facility, slicing through the heavy fog of an early Georgia morning. Officer Danielle "Danny" Cole gripped her radio with trembling hands, her heart hammering as a cold sweat slicked her brow. An inmate was dead, and deep down, Danny knew, before anyone pointed a finger, before the blood was scrubbed from the cracked concrete floors, that this death would lead straight to her. Because love, even the secret, forbidden kind, leaves fingerprints, and no amount of scrubbing could erase the ones she'd left behind. Echo Bay Correctional Facility sat like a scar across the swamplands of rural Georgia, hidden beneath endless gray skies and choking humidity. It was a crumbling fortress of cracked stone and rusted steel, surrounded by razor wire that curled like poisonous vines. Inside its rotting walls, the state's most dangerous criminals were stacked like forgotten corpses, a place where hope wasn't just abandoned, it was hunted down and crushed. Danielle "Danny" Cole, just 26, arrived at Echo Bay's maximum security wing after 3 years of spotless service elsewhere. Small but unshakably tough, with sharp brown eyes that seemed to see too much, Danny wore her uniform like armor, every step measured and silent. Her quiet seriousness unsettled both inmates and fellow officers alike. Inside Echo Bay, time melted. Days blurred into nights under the harsh fluorescent lights. Orders were barked, keys clanged against iron doors, souls frayed slowly, invisibly, until they were nothing but smoke. And somewhere deep within those rotting halls, behind a maze of reinforced bars and bad intentions, lurked Malik St. Johnson, inmate 04597, a man whose mind was sharper than any shiv, a man patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Danielle Cole wasn't supposed to end up here. Growing up under the wide, sun-bleached skies of Savannah, Danny had dreamed bigger than the corner lots and peeling porches of her neighborhood. She was going to be a lawyer, standing in front of a courtroom with her head high, her voice sharp and sure, a champion for the ones no one else bothered to fight for. But dreams cost money, and life had a brutal way of collecting debts. When Danny's mother was diagnosed with a rare aggressive illness, their savings evaporated in months. College applications turned into unpaid hospital bills. Law textbooks were swapped for night shifts at the grocery store. And when the final blow came, a hospice nurse's quiet call in the dead of night, Danny's world folded in on itself. Grief hollowed her out, left her needing something, anything, that felt steady under her feet. That's when she took the badge. Corrections officer, a paycheck, a uniform that fit like armor. Echo Bay wasn't her first post, but it was the first place that felt different, harsher, louder, meaner. The other officers joked about turning into furniture, cold, hard, immovable things that simply existed inside the concrete tomb. Danny didn't laugh with them. She felt it already happening inside her, the slow, creeping numbness, the way her heart seemed to beat slower inside those gray walls. And then came Malik Johnson. On paper, just another name in a sea of dangerous men. Life without parole, armed robbery turned deadly, a cautionary tale from the outside world. But in person, Malik didn't fit any mold Danny had prepared for. He was articulate, almost mesmerizing, a former community organizer who had once stood in front of church congregations and school gymnasiums, preaching about hope, resilience, change. When he read aloud during library duties, passages from Baldwin, Hughes, Angelou, his voice wrapped around the words like velvet dipped in iron, solid, smooth, undeniable. At first, Danny did what she was trained to do: ignore, dismiss, maintain distance. Professionalism was her shield. But loneliness is an expert thief. It doesn't take what you give, it finds the parts you forgot you had and steals them in silence. Late nights blurred into sleepless mornings. The dull ache of waking up and realizing no one was waiting for her outside Echo Bay's rusted gates. The quiet way Malik would sometimes look at her, not with lust, not with manipulation, but with something that almost looked like understanding. The older guards noticed, made their jokes in the break room. "Ain't nobody coming to visit you, Cole. We're all you got now." Danny laughed along with them, a tight, unnatural sound. But deep down, a part of her ached at how true it felt. And Malik, always watching, must have sensed it. Because one rainy afternoon, as the thunder rolled across the swamps outside, he handed her a gift. A tiny paper crane, folded with trembling care from a torn scrap of old newspaper. Inside the delicate wings he had written just 6 words: "You still deserve something beautiful." It should have been an alarm bell, should have triggered every training protocol drilled into her. But instead, Danny slipped the crane into her pocket like a secret. That night, as she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment, she turned the crane over and over in her hands, feeling the thin thread weaving between them, invisible but growing stronger by the second. She told herself it was harmless, just words, just kindness. But in Echo Bay, kindness had a price, and somewhere deep inside, Danny already knew she had begun to pay it. It started small, innocent almost. Brief conversations about books during library duty, jokes about the watery cafeteria stew, quiet glances that lingered just a heartbeat too long. At first, Danny told herself it was harmless, a human connection in a place designed to strip humanity away. But slowly, the cracks widened. She began to notice little things, things that didn't fit the narrative of harmless conversation, like Malik's uncanny way of knowing which guards were too lazy to double-check door locks, which surveillance cameras had blind spots because of old wiring, where Officer Ray's patrol lagged by 15 minutes every Tuesday night because he always sneaked a smoke break behind the generator shed. The way Malik's conversations would drift, gently, almost imperceptibly, toward dangerous ideas. Freedom, second chances, what life could look like beyond the razor wire if only, if only. One evening, as the sun melted into blood orange across the iron bars, Malik leaned in closer than usual, his voice a low hum. "What would you do if nobody was watching, Danny?" It was just a question. But it sank into her mind like a fishhook. She laughed it off, shoved it aside. But later that night, in her tiny apartment that smelled like old coffee and damp uniforms, Danny found herself dreaming. Dreaming of running barefoot across open fields, dreaming of skies without fences, days without clocks ticking down shift after shift, dreaming of feeling seen, not as a uniform, not as a number, but as a person. She started noticing herself changing in tiny ways, smoothing her hair before rounds, choosing her words more carefully when speaking to Malik, lingering just a moment longer when their hands brushed exchanging library books. Other inmates noticed too. Eyes followed her in the halls now, calculating, assessing. Whispers followed her like smoke. Officer Henderson, old enough to have seen it all twice over, muttered as she passed one afternoon. "Careful, Cole. Echo Bay's seen better guards fall harder." She laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that bounced too loudly off the concrete walls. But the warnings piled up. Malik's smile, once soft and wistful, sometimes hardened into something sharper when he thought she wasn't looking. Sometimes his eyes tracked her not like a friend, but like a wolf studying a fence post, measuring the distance, calculating the jump. And still Danny ignored the signs. Because in a place like Echo Bay, where everything was cold and gray and endlessly broken, even a dangerous light could feel like salvation. And sometimes, she thought as she drifted off to sleep with the paper crane tucked under her pillow, it was better to feel alive for a moment, even if it meant crashing hard enough to never get back up again. The shift came on a night soaked in rain, the kind of rain that seemed alive, pounding against the crumbling stone walls of Echo Bay like 1,000 fists demanding entry. Thunder growled low across the swamp, rattling the old facility down to its bones. Inside the break room, guards huddled around battered tables, nursing lukewarm coffee, swapping the same tired gossip. The only way to survive nights like this was to pretend the storm wasn't already inside the walls, too. Danny barely heard them. She was making her rounds when she found Malik waiting in the dim glow of the library hall. He didn't say a word, just handed her an old tattered Bible, its cracked leather spine barely holding together. Inside, tucked between the brittle pages, was a letter, handwritten, precise. Her heart stumbled in her chest as she read, a list of every camera in C block and the blind spots between them. Notes about door 3C, the faulty lock that lagged 2 full seconds before engaging. A rough, dirt-streaked map of the swamp that slithered beyond Echo Bay's perimeter fence, showing escape routes, patrol gaps, even the depth of the marsh water at key crossing points. And at the bottom, 6 words scrawled in Malik's careful hand. "Just dream with me, Danny." One night, one chance, one life. Her palms were slick with sweat. This wasn't harmless flirting. This wasn't poetry tucked in folded cranes anymore. This was conspiracy. a felony, a betrayal of everything she had sworn to protect. Danny pressed the letter between the thin pages and gripped it like a burning coal. The plan was clear in her mind. March straight to Warden Barnes' office, drop the Bible on his desk, tell the truth, scrape whatever redemption she could from the mess growing at her feet. But fate or fear or something darker intervened. Later that night, passing Malik's cell during final rounds, she saw him, slumped against the bars, fresh bruises blooming dark across his ribs and jaw, his breathing ragged, a busted lip split wide. "Just a misunderstanding," he croaked when she hesitated. Guards didn't see nothing. His eyes met hers through the bars. No charm now, no games, just a raw, bleeding desperation that clawed at something buried deep inside her. A voice inside her screamed, "Walk away." But another, quieter, crueler, whispered, "He's the only one who ever saw you." Her hand brushed the pocket where the Bible still rested, heavy as a loaded gun. When her shift ended, Danny didn't go to Barnes. She didn't report the letter, didn't report the bruises. She drove home in silence, the windshield wipers battling sheets of rain. In her small apartment, she pried up a floorboard in her closet and hid the Bible beneath it, pressing it down like a grave. That night, sleep was a stranger. She lay awake, the storm raging outside, and dreamed not of duty or honor, but of open skies, of sunlight on her face instead of fluorescent buzz, of freedom, of Malik's hand reaching for hers across a border of wire and stone. She told herself it was only a dream, that she hadn't chosen anything yet. But deep down, something final had already shifted inside her. Malik's parole hearing had been his last hope. And when it was denied, swiftly, mercilessly, something inside him broke in a way Danny had never seen before. He delivered the news to her during a late library shift, the storm gathering in his eyes. Gone was the soft-spoken poet who folded paper cranes and whispered about dreams. In his place stood a stranger, a cold, calculating strategist who barely masked the fury trembling under his skin. "You're helping me out," Malik said, voice low and sharp as a blade, "or I make sure they find out what you've been doing." Before Danny could speak, before she could even blink, Malik pulled a ragged manila envelope from beneath a stack of old magazines. Inside were copies of their letters, notes, little hidden messages, the fragile paper trail of everything she thought was buried between them. Proof, undeniable, fatal. Danny's world spun sideways. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. The line they had tiptoed along for months wasn't blurry anymore. It was shattered, and she was already standing on the wrong side. Malik didn't ask for help anymore. He demanded obedience. Every dream he had fed her, every soft word, all of it had been just another part of the plan. The plan he laid out was chilling in its simplicity. Danny would disable the alarms on C Block just before lights out. Malik would stage a chaotic brawl to cover his slip from the yard. She would meet him in the old laundry room near the disused service tunnels. From there, freedom. The map, the timing, the routes, they were already in place. She was simply the final key. But Danny couldn't breathe under the crushing weight of it. Couldn't picture herself running across marshes, ducking spotlights, living the rest of her life in the shadows. Couldn't bear to imagine her mother, proud even through the sickness, hearing the news of her daughter in handcuffs. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to turn him in, to save herself. But it was too late. The trap was already sprung. The night of the escape attempt was soaked in darkness. Heavy clouds swallowed the moon, leaving the prison grounds bathed in a thick, claustrophobic black. The air hung heavy with static, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Danny waited in the laundry room, a windowless tomb that smelled of bleach and rust, her uniform sticking to her skin. Her heart thrashed wildly, a frantic bird against the bars of her ribs. Every creak of the old pipes made her flinch. Every shuffle of unseen footsteps outside made her blood roar in her ears. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternities, and then he appeared, slipping through the cracked door like a ghost. Malik. But not the Malik she had once adored in whispered secrets. Not the boy with dreams and folded cranes. This Malik wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator's smile. Deadly. "Sure. You ready, baby?" he whispered. The words slithered over her skin like ice water. In that instant, no longer clouded by loneliness or fantasy or the desperate hunger to be seen, Danny saw the truth. She was never his partner. She was his pawn. a disposable tool, and he was here not for her salvation but for her destruction. Something inside Danny snapped. A final, irrevocable fracture. She took a step back, shaking her head. Malik advanced, slow and steady, as if he could still charm her, still pull the puppet strings he had buried inside her heart. "You're not walking away," he said, voice low and deadly. "You're in this now." The walls closed in. The roar of the industrial dryers masked their struggle, swallowed the desperate sounds. A flash, a glint of metal, a broken pipe torn loose from the back wall during old repairs. Instinct took over, raw and final. A muffled shout, a sharp, terrible clash, and suddenly silence, crushing, total. Malik lay crumpled on the concrete floor, motionless. A dark stain spread slowly beneath him, soaking into the cracks. His hand twitched once, twice, then stilled forever. Danny stood over him, gasping for air she couldn't seem to find. Her fingers trembled. Her heart pounded against her ribs so violently she thought it might break free. There was no time to think, no time to cry. Before the alarms could start wailing, she moved on pure, desperate instinct. She smeared a stolen jacket, one she had hidden days earlier, near the scene. She smashed a chair into jagged splinters to suggest a brutal gang fight. Reset the glitchy security alarm timer to delay discovery by precious minutes. When the other guards came crashing into the laundry room, weapons drawn and shouting, Danny was already kneeling beside Malik's lifeless body. Her hands, wet and shaking, pressed uselessly against his chest. Her voice rang out, hoarse and frantic. "Help! Help! They jumped him! I tried to stop it!" The story would be simple, plausible. Another tragedy in Echo Bay's long, bloody history. A gang fight gone wrong, one less inmate, one more name to carve into the stone wall of the dead. Nothing more. Nothing more. Danny kept telling herself that as she was led away, as officers flooded the scene, as Malik's body was zipped into a black bag, but deep down, she already knew the truth. Nothing in Echo Bay ever stayed buried for long. Echo Bay swallowed its dead quickly. By the time the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, Malik Johnson's body had already been zipped into a black bag and carted away through the service tunnels, as if erasing him fast enough could erase what had happened. The official reports formed like clockwork, stamped and signed before the morning coffee cooled. Inmate altercation. Fatal injuries sustained during gang dispute. Officer Cole, first responder. For a moment, Danny allowed herself to believe it, that the brutal, terrible night could be tucked away along with Malik's body, that she could slip back into her life like nothing had happened, just another exhausted officer clocking out after a bloody shift. But Echo Bay's walls had mouths, and suspicion was a seed that never died. It just grew in the darkness. The first real crack appeared when Detective Leon Bridges was called in from the State Bureau. Not some tired local cop easily distracted by paperwork and politics, but a sharp-eyed investigator with a predator's patience. The kind of man who could smell fear the way bloodhounds smelled blood. He showed up wearing a weathered leather jacket and a slow, syrupy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind walking me through it again, Officer Cole?" he asked, casual as a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. Again, and again, and again. Each retelling of her story. The brawl, the chaos, the heroic attempt to save Malik, left Danny feeling more exposed, more tangled in the lies she had spun too hastily, too desperately. Each innocent question chipped away another piece of her armor. And then there was Dr. Simone Reed, Echo Bay's resident psychologist. Calm, steady, watching Danny the way a surgeon watches a wound. Unlike Bridges, Dr. Reed didn't ask about the night Malik died. She asked about everything else. "Have you been feeling isolated, Officer Cole? Any difficulties adjusting to the Echo Bay environment? Did you ever grow close to any of the inmates under your supervision?" Each question sliced deeper, drawing blood Danny couldn't afford to show. Her world, once so tightly controlled, began to shrink around her. Other guards started acting differently, too. Conversations would fall awkwardly silent when she entered a room. Side glances lingered a little too long. The joking camaraderie she'd once hated now felt like a shield she had somehow lost. Late one afternoon, returning from a mandatory counseling session with Dr. Reed, Danny found something waiting for her in her tiny office. Slipped under the door like a snake slithering inside, a folded scrap of paper. No name, no signature, just one sentence written in a jagged scrawl. Secrets never stay buried long in a graveyard like this. Her hands trembled as she crushed the note into her pocket, glancing over her shoulder, even though she already knew there was no one she could trust anymore. The walls of Echo Bay, once cold and indifferent, now seemed alive, breathing, watching. And Danny realized the truth she had been too scared to face. The real prison wasn't just bars and locks. It was the lies, and they were closing in. It began with little things, the kind of details Danny thought she had buried perfectly, hidden under layers of routine and professionalism. But Echo Bay didn't forget. And neither did Detective Leon Bridges. At first, it was just a few questions, casual, friendly. "Mind if we review your incident report one more time, Officer Cole?" But each question was a carefully laid tripwire, each innocent pause a trap disguised as mercy. Surveillance footage, the grainy, low-resolution film Echo Bay relied on, revealed inconsistencies, small ones but fatal ones. The alarm on C Block, the one Danny claimed to have discovered glitching after the attack, showed signs of being tampered with long before the fatal night. Bridges pointed it out with a lazy tap of his pen against the table, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. "Funny how nobody else noticed that glitch, isn't it?" he mused. And Danny's stomach twisted into tighter and tighter knots. Then came the cell search, a routine sweep of Malek's former bunk, nothing unusual, nothing personal, except that under a loose floor tile they found a hidden stash. Books with hollowed-out centers, crumpled scraps of letters written in a distinct, looping hand that no handwriting expert would have trouble matching to Officer Danielle Cole. In one of the notes, scrawled in black ink still smudged with fingerprints, were the damning words, "You still deserve something beautiful." The very same words she once, foolishly, beautifully, believed could be a secret only they shared. The very same words she now realized had been a trap from the beginning. Bridges didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. Dr. Simone Reed ramped up her interviews with the inmates. At first, the rumors seemed too thin to stand on. Whispers in the hallways, half-truths and suspicion. But slowly, the whispers hardened into something undeniable. Secret glances during rounds. Quiet conversations in corners where cameras conveniently malfunctioned. A softening in Officer Cole's posture whenever she passed Malik Johnson's cell. They didn't have video proof of the touches, the stolen notes passed between library shelves, but the absence of evidence, the missing footage, the gaps in reports, screamed louder than a confession. Danny tried to hold herself together, tried to be the composed, stoic professional she had trained herself to be. But the walls around her tightened with every passing day. Whispers followed her down the corridors. Conversations stopped dead the moment she entered a room. Even the guards she once called colleagues began looking through her instead of at her. She barely slept, haunted by the suffocating sense that every step she took was on cracking ice. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and everything would come crashing down. Finally, the summons came, the warden's office. The walk there felt longer than any shift she had ever worked. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered overhead, casting long, twitching shadows across the filthy linoleum floors. Waiting inside were Warden Barnes, Detective Bridges, and Dr. Reed. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate in thick, suffocating silence. A folder sat open on the desk between them, thick, bulging with photos, letters, handwritten notes. The cold, undeniable proof of her betrayal. Bridges spoke first, his voice devoid of mockery but loaded with the heavy finality of a grave being filled. "We don't believe you killed him out of cruelty, Officer Cole," he said quietly. "We believe you killed him because he made you desperate." Dr. Reed leaned forward, her voice softer but no less sharp. "Danielle, you're not the first good officer to lose their way, but if you have any hope of saving what's left of yourself, you need to tell the truth." The room seemed to tilt, the buzzing lights growing louder, drowning out reason, drowning out hope. Danny opened her mouth to lie again, to weave one last desperate story, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, a shuddering breath escaped her. And then everything she had held inside came spilling out. The forbidden letters, the whispered promises, the dreams spun like silk across barbed wire fences, the manipulation that turned hope into blackmail, the fatal moment when she realized that saving herself meant destroying him. No excuses, no justifications, just raw, broken honesty. When she finished speaking, the room fell into a stillness so absolute it made her ears ring. Only the cold buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the void, a sound that would follow her for the rest of her life. Warden Barnes finally spoke, his voice heavy with something almost like grief. "You were one of the good ones, Cole," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You just forgot which side of the bars you were on." And in that moment, stripped of badge, title, and pretense, Danny understood the true price of crossing the line. It wasn't just freedom she lost, it was herself. The trial was merciless, like a machine designed not to deliver justice, but to crush every last illusion of hope. The tabloids had a field day. Screaming headlines painted her humiliation in fonts so large they felt like shouts. "Officer betrayed by inmate lover. Love turns deadly behind bars. Prison guard crosses line and pays the price." Danny sat stoically through it all, through the cold reading of evidence, through the parade of witnesses, guards, inmates, psychologists, each carving away the last pieces of her dignity under oath, through the prosecutors who spoke about her like she was an exhibit, a cautionary relic behind glass. Her attorney, a wiry man with tired eyes and a thinning tie, did his best. He argued for leniency, talked about emotional manipulation, about how isolation inside Echo Bay was designed to eat away at the mind, leaving even the strongest vulnerable. How Danny's relationship with Malik Johnson hadn't been about rebellion or evil, but about desperate human weakness. It was a moment of panic, not a premeditated act of violence, he told the jury, voice earnest but fraying at the edges. She did not plan a murder. She made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But the facts, laid bare, were brutal and unyielding. A dead inmate, a falsified crime scene, a betrayal of oath, trust, and the thin, sacred line between guard and prisoner. The prosecution hammered every point home like nails into a coffin. They showed the letters. They replayed the timeline. They described how an officer sworn to uphold the law had helped plan an escape, and then killed her accomplice when the web of lies began to unravel. Danny barely heard the words when the judge finally pronounced sentence: 15 years. St. Helena Correctional Facility. The bailiff cuffed her wrists in front of the whole court. Her mother's old locket, the only thing she'd worn beneath her uniform for years, swung against her chest as she was led away. A final, silent goodbye to the girl she used to be. Danny didn't cry. Not when they sentenced her. Not when she was walked past flashing cameras and jeering reporters. Not when the prison van's doors slammed shut with a sound like a tomb being sealed. It was only weeks later, when she sat alone in her new cell at St. Helena, that the tears finally came. Silent, shaking, the heavy clang of the cell door echoing around her like a funeral bell. St. Helena was different from Echo Bay, worse in a way she hadn't thought possible. Here, there were no illusions, no masks. Every woman behind these bars was broken in her own way, and they could smell fresh cracks a mile away. Danny was not Officer Cole anymore. She was Inmate 37241, another number to be sorted, shackled, and forgotten. Worse, she was a story, a whispered legend among guards and inmates alike. To the rookies, she became a warning muttered during training briefings. Keep your distance. Echo Bay's Danny Cole thought she was untouchable too. To the hardened veterans, she was a grim reminder that even the most promising could fall. That loneliness, unchecked and hungry, could turn even a star officer into a ghost. Her first weeks at St. Helena blurred into a haze of gray. She moved through the days in silence, folding laundry, scrubbing floors, doing anything to keep from thinking too much. The other inmates left her mostly alone, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Predators smelled weakness, but they also respected the kind of wreckage that couldn't be undone by fists. Some nights, when the cell block fell into uneasy sleep, Danny would press her forehead against the cold concrete wall and whisper the words that once had saved her and destroyed her. You still deserve something beautiful. Only now she wasn't sure if it had ever been a promise. Maybe it had always been a curse, because beauty, the kind that mattered, the kind that healed, didn't grow in places like St. Helena. It shriveled, it starved, it died screaming into the dark, just like every other piece of Danny Cole that Echo Bay hadn't already taken. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of her bones, Danny finally understood. Some chains are forged by the law, but the worst ones, the ones that never break, are forged by the heart. St. Helena was a different kind of prison, quieter, more broken, like a graveyard where nobody was allowed to die. Danny worked the laundry room now, folding uniforms, stitching holes shut with bleeding fingers. She never spoke much, never smiled, but she watched the new young officers walk the halls, proud and clean and certain they were untouchable. She wanted to shout warnings at them, to tell them about how loneliness can make liars of good people, about how love, or what you think is love, can wrap chains around your soul tighter than any set of handcuffs. But nobody would listen. They never did. And so Danny folded shirts and folded silence around herself like armor, another ghost haunting the cracked walls of St. Helena, another name scratched into the long, unbroken history of prisons not built just from bricks, but from broken hearts. In the darkest corners of the world, sometimes the greatest battles aren't between good and evil, but between loyalty and loneliness. How far would you go to feel seen?